My husband finally ended contact with his toxic mom and sister after they demanded we. Can you imagine a mother-in-law demanding you give up your home, the home you worked tirelessly for, just because you couldn't have children? That's what happened to me, and it was a shocking final straw that pushed my husband to finally cut ties with his toxic family for good. 4 years, I watched Jacob, my husband, navigate a truly destructive dynamic with his mother and sister. He was the golden child, his mother's favorite, spending endless hours with her while his busy father worked. But his sister, Sarah, always seemed to be in the shadows. Though his mom loved them both, her favoritism for Jacob was glaring, and I knew Sarah felt it deeply. Jacob, bless his heart, always tried to fill that void, being the kind, ever-present big brother. But sometimes their behavior, especially Sarah's, crossed a line that was simply unbearable. I remember when Jacob and I first started dating. He was fresh out of college, living in his parents' house, but they'd given him his own private level. It meant he could invite me over, and sometimes I'd stay the night. But morning after morning, Sarah would just storm into our room. No knock, no warning. We weren't always dressed, as you can imagine, yet she'd act like it was completely normal, launching into random conversations with Jacob. It was incredibly unsettling. I mean, I get he lived with his family, but a simple knock? Was that too much to ask? We barely knew each other, and it felt incredibly rude to be seen in such vulnerable moments. I finally had to speak to Jacob. I told him I wouldn't come over unless he installed a lock. He agreed, but the very next morning, all hell broke loose. Sarah tried to barge in, found the door locked, and started screaming, jiggling the handle, banging on the wood, begging him to let her in. Jacob eventually relented. She stormed in, demanding to know why the door was locked, and when she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Is it because of the skank?" she spat, pointing at me. My jaw dropped. The venom in her voice, the sheer insult. I was absolutely stunned. Jacob tried to explain he wanted privacy, but Sarah wouldn't hear it. "We're siblings. We don't keep secrets," she raged. Jacob insisted he had no secrets, just didn't want her barging in on us while we were asleep. She whipped her head to me, accusing me. "It's all your fault. You're interfering with my brother." I'm usually not one for confrontation, so I excused myself to the bathroom, shaking. I could hear her still screaming at Jacob through the door. When she finally left, Jacob came in, comforting me, apologizing profusely, promising she'd apologize. And she did, the next weekend. A pitiful apology, claiming some urgent need to talk to Jacob. He sternly told her not to bother us again, and she sheepishly agreed. But that wasn't the end of her bizarre behavior. If Jacob and I disagreed on anything, even something as trivial as a movie choice, Sarah would chime in, telling him he should date someone with comparable likes, implying we were incompatible. Jacob would glare, but she'd just smirk. Then came the intrusive questions, digging into my past. "Why did your ex break up with you? Weren't you good enough?" Or the outright cruel remarks. "My brother's previous girlfriend was far more attractive than you." Always when Jacob wasn't around. She was trying to play a game, to chip away at me. I stayed silent for a while, but eventually I'd had enough. One day, after another snide remark, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I actually preferred my ex-boyfriend's family. They didn't have nosy, overbearing members like some people." The look on her face was priceless. It temporarily silenced her, and for that moment it felt good. Sarah wasn't the only one. My mother-in-law, initially, pretended I didn't exist. But once she realized Jacob and I were serious, she flipped, acting as if I was trying to steal her son. At family dinners, she'd pointedly ignore me. Jacob would try to intervene, but it never changed. She even called me, stuck up and spoiled, just because I went to private school and she was a public school teacher. I later found out she tried to talk Jacob out of marrying me, telling him to find someone better. Fortunately, Jacob didn't care and proposed anyway. Their shock when he proposed was almost comical. Both of them called me, telling me it was a horrible decision, demanding I end the relationship and return the ring. I was baffled. I told them they were crossing a line. I loved Jacob and wanted to spend my life with him. When they saw they couldn't sway me, my mother-in-law reluctantly changed tactics, telling me I needed to be the best wife for Jacob, caring for him just like she had. It was deeply offensive, but I try to shrug it off. Sarah, though, went full throttle, accusing me of being a gold digger, claiming Jacob deserved higher status. She even threatened to expose me before the wedding, so Jacob wouldn't marry me. I immediately told Jacob everything. He was furious, taken aback by their disrespect. He confronted them, but they just dug their heels in, convinced I wasn't good enough. Jacob, however, stood by me, assuring me his love was unshaken. Still, it hurt, deeply, that his own family couldn't accept me. We had decided to pay for our own wedding, so when my mother-in-law offered to cover half, we politely declined. Jacob explained how hard we'd worked to save for it. Instead of being proud, she became enraged, claiming he no longer needed her. Thankfully, Jacob's father, Phil, was always kind and supportive. He was a calming presence. To appease his mother, we compromised. She could organize the rehearsal dinner. She agreed, and we genuinely appreciated the gesture. But as the wedding day approached, things took a truly dark turn. The first incident was Sarah inviting herself to dinner with us. We were living alone now, post-engagement, and thought she genuinely missed her brother. I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to seem difficult. As we ate, Sarah suddenly launched into a tirade about cheating partners, calling them useless pieces of trash. We looked at her, confused. Then, she stared directly at me. So, how does it feel to be a useless piece of trash? My blood ran cold. She started ranting, accusing me of having an affair with my coworker, Zach. Jacob was bewildered. Sarah then triumphantly pulled out photos, waving them around, claiming she caught me red-handed. I knew I'd never cheated, so I was baffled. Looking at the pictures, they were completely innocent. Zach and I were close coworkers, starting at the same time, helping each other avoid manager criticism. Zach even had a girlfriend, which Jacob knew. My phone wasn't locked, and I was always open about my colleagues. Sarah had twisted perfectly normal, pleasant moments into evidence of a fictitious affair. It was infuriating. She was clearly trying to damage my reputation and sabotage my relationship. Before I could even defend myself, Jacob, visibly shaken and angry, stepped in. He demanded to know why she was following me, taking photos in public places without permission. Sarah, caught, started rationalizing. She just wanted to investigate me because I wasn't their status, and she feared I was marrying Jacob for his money. Jacob shut her down. Her accusations were false. She was creating drama, spreading lies. But Sarah insisted he open his eyes. I tried to explain we were just coworkers, but she wouldn't listen. The tension was palpable. I'd had enough. I told her I was going to make a police report for illegal photography and stalking. Her face went white. "Are you serious?" she stammered. I told her I had proof she tracked me, taken pictures without consent, and was slandering me. She looked from Jacob to me, arguing she did it to protect her brother, that it wasn't a big deal. She pleaded with Jacob to talk me out of it, worried it would jeopardize her job. I told her she could only save herself. Sarah asked what I wanted. I promised not to pursue the complaint if she stayed out of my life. She had no other choice. She looked to Jacob for support, but he stood by me. "You should be grateful she's letting this go, Sarah. What you did was clearly wrong." She reluctantly agreed, and we haven't spoken since. Jacob still has a relationship with her, but she avoids me completely. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. The second incident happened just before our wedding, at the rehearsal dinner. My mother-in-law, who'd insisted on planning everything, refused any help. But when we arrived, it was a disaster. Picnic tables draped in plastic tablecloths, cold Mexican food. She sulked and drank excessively throughout dinner, making inappropriate comments, repeatedly complaining about how stressful the wedding planning was, even though she hadn't contributed money or actual help. Eventually, my father-in-law, Phil, had to drag her away. Sarah tried to defend her, but Phil wasn't having it. The whole thing was a fiasco, and I began to truly fear they would ruin the wedding itself. That night, Jacob and I had our first real fight. I told him, unequivocally, that he had to uninvite Sarah and his mother. Their behavior guaranteed they'd try to overshadow us. He was furious, promising Phil would keep them in line. But I was done. I told him if they weren't uninvited, there would be no wedding. Jacob was shocked. I knew how extreme I sounded, but the thought of being humiliated again on our day was unbearable. Jacob had always struggled with boundaries, and I hoped this ultimatum would make him finally see how destructive his family was. Thankfully, he did. The next morning, he called his father, telling him his mother and sister were uninvited. Phil wasn't surprised, just promised to ensure they wouldn't show up. Soon after, my mother-in-law and Sarah barraged Jacob with calls, trying to persuade him. But he stood firm, telling them he wasn't comfortable with them there because of how they treated me. My mother-in-law accused me of being a terrible influence, interfering with her son. Sarah tried to argue, but Jacob was resolute. I felt terrible that Phil couldn't come, and I even regretted the ultimatum for a moment. But then, Jacob's cousins reached out. They told me that in their family WhatsApp group, for female members only, Sarah had encouraged everyone to wear white to our wedding, stating, "There's no reason for the bride to be the only one." My stomach dropped. I was absolutely astounded by how low they would stoop to hurt me. Any remorse I had vanished instantly. I was relieved they wouldn't be there. Jacob missed his family, but he understood why. Our wedding day was beautiful, peaceful, and truly ours. Since then, my mother-in-law and Sarah have completely stopped talking to me, which frankly, I'm more than okay with. They still invited Jacob to dinners, and he would go, but it never bothered me. Phil, however, remained a kind and constant presence in my life. Jacob and I worked incredibly hard, saving every penny. This year, we finally bought our first home, a spacious, beautiful place that meant the world to us. We were overjoyed. Jacob's parents and Sarah came for a small housewarming, but I chose to spend that day with my own family. Then, last month, the phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. I hadn't spoken to her since our wedding day. Her call was utterly baffling. She started off, surprisingly, asking about my well-being, my life. I was taken aback, but polite. Then, her tone shifted. "How does it feel to live in such a spacious house with just you and Jacob?" The comment stung. Jacob and I had been trying to conceive for a long time, but infertility had crushed that dream. We'd grieved, but slowly, painfully, we'd come to terms with it. Early on, I even told Jacob he could leave me if he wanted children, but he always stayed, always assured me we were enough. Our families knew about this. Her comment was a cruel, calculated jab. Then she dropped the bomb. Sarah was pregnant again. Her sixth child. Jacob had told me about Sarah's husband, unemployed, completely lazy, didn't believe in contraception, treated Sarah like a personal maid, never paid bills. Sarah worked multiple part-time jobs while he gamed all day. No matter how much everyone tried to talk sense into her, Sarah refused to leave him. My mother-in-law then declared that since Sarah couldn't afford to work during this pregnancy, Jacob and I should give up our house for her and her family. Because, she reasoned, it was too big for a childless couple like us. I was speechless, my mind reeling. I asked if she was joking. She wasn't. She was completely serious. Sarah and her jobless husband deserved a bigger house, and since her own house wasn't big enough, we were simply expected to take them in. The audacity hung heavy in the air. I fought to keep my composure. "This is our house," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We're still paying for it. The idea of someone else moving in without our permission is intrusive and ridiculous." My mother-in-law then claimed she'd already spoken to Jacob, and he had, allegedly, consented. This was a blatant lie. Jacob and I are always open, and he would never have agreed to that without telling me. I firmly told her that since the house belonged to both of us, Jacob couldn't grant permission alone. No one was moving in unless we both agreed. As a compromise, I offered for Sarah and her family to stay a few days if they truly needed it, but certainly not permanently. My mother-in-law exploded. Yelling, she argued that as a responsible daughter-in-law, I was required to make room for them. She even promised that if I complied, all previous troubles would be forgiven. Rage bubbled up. I smiled, a tight, cynical smile. "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to let them take our place. But we're still paying for it, and I'm confident Sarah and her husband won't help with the mortgage or bills. So, how about you take some responsibility and contribute to their living expenses? I'd be grateful if you could just cover the mortgage. We'll manage the rest. Of course, with only one job, you'll definitely need a second one to cover the home payments." Please let me know when you intend to get that second job. My mother-in-law absolutely exploded in fury, shouting about how crazy I was to expect her to pay. I calmly retorted that it was equally ridiculous for her to expect us to care for Sarah's family and let them move in rent-free. That infuriated her even more, and she continued to yell while I just stood there, a satisfied smirk on my face. Eventually, she hung up, realizing I wouldn't budge. Soon after, Sarah called, screaming at me for daring to ask her mother to pay our mortgage. She then, incredibly, called me a gold digger. No, I shot back. You're the gold digger, trying to live with us without contributing. If you want to know who the real gold digger is, look at your own partner, who does absolutely nothing to help you. That seemed to silence her. I told Sarah she could argue all she wanted, but I would never let her family into our home unless they agreed to help with the mortgage. She accused me of being cruel, of putting money before family. The tables had finally turned, and I felt an immense relief, sticking up for myself, refusing to back down, taking control of my home and my life. But still, a small part of me wondered, was I the villain? Update 1. Thank you for all your support. The most common question was, why would my mother-in-law demand such a stupid thing? It's because she's always been so entitled, and my husband has tolerated it for far too long. She'd even lie about her own son to get her way. Sarah, meanwhile, is a pawn, doing whatever her mother wishes in hopes of finally garnering some favor. In this situation, Sarah stood to gain everything, free housing, while her useless husband continued to do nothing. I was waiting for Jacob to return from his business trip. This was too important to discuss over the phone. Update 2. It's been 3 days since my last update. Jacob returned, and we finally sat down. I laid it all out. His mother's call, her demand for our house. Jacob was genuinely shocked. He'd only known Sarah was pregnant. His mother hadn't mentioned anything about moving into our home. I told him forcefully that he needed to speak with his mother, that I couldn't bear his family anymore. He agreed. Jacob confronted his mother, asking why she had lied to me about his consent. Caught red-handed, she tried to backtrack, claiming she hadn't actually lied. She just knew Jacob would have no objections, so she took it upon herself to approach me. Jacob cut her off, demanding why she'd ever think he'd be fine with Sarah, her unemployed husband, and 6 children moving in. She tried to say that because they were so close, he'd naturally want to support Sarah. I closed my eyes in disgust but let Jacob handle it. Jacob firmly told her that he was not going to let them move in. He also stated, point blank, that she had no authority to compel us to take care of them. My mother-in-law started yelling about Sarah, desperately needing aid, but Jacob retorted that it wasn't our job. If she wanted to help, she could take care of Sarah herself. Then, she revealed Phil, Jacob's father, didn't want them in their smaller house. And then came the truly shocking, disgusting comment. She had the audacity to suggest that since I was childless, helping Sarah's children would make me feel fulfilled. My eyes widened in utter disbelief, but then I saw Jacob's face. It drained of color. He absolutely raged at her. He screamed that she had no right to say such vile things about me, no right to use my deepest pain to manipulate us. He then dropped another bomb. Phil wanted nothing to do with Sarah, calling her a childbirthing machine, and that he was completely over both of them. My mother-in-law tried to backtrack again, but Jacob wouldn't let her. He told her he had done his best to maintain a connection, even after they'd repeatedly disrespected me, but he couldn't take it anymore. His mother begged, but Jacob was resolute. This is our home, he said, his voice hard, and I am his wife. Anyone who offends her disrespects me, and you don't deserve to be in my life. With those final words, Jacob ended the call. He hasn't spoken to Sarah or his mother since. Phil called Jacob later, and after hearing the whole story, he completely understood Jacob's decision. He even apologized to me on his wife's behalf, though I told him it wasn't his responsibility. Update 3. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. Many of you suggested cameras, just in case, so I ordered some and installed them. Good thing, too, because last weekend, they showed up, banging on my door while I was home alone. Seeing them on the camera, I quickly called Jacob, who was on his way. I opened the door just enough. There they stood, my mother-in-law and Sarah, both absolutely furious. They demanded I let them in, but I refused, telling them to say what they needed to say from outside. My mother-in-law immediately launched into a rant, accusing me of being callous, greedy, and selfish. I politely reminded her it was our home, and they had no right to enter uninvited. She continued her tirade, completely unaware that the cameras were recording every single word. I reminded her of our previous call, emphasizing I would not give up our house. If she had anything else to say, she could wait for Jacob. Sarah then started screaming, accusing me of breaking up the family, being a gold digger, and trying to take her brother away. I calmly told them everything they were saying was being recorded, and I would use the footage to obtain a restraining order if necessary. Their eyes widened. My mother-in-law exclaimed, "You wouldn't dare." I smirked. "If you don't leave the property immediately, you receive a legal notice very soon." That hit them. Sarah tried to say I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big problem. Just then, Jacob arrived. He approached them casually, asking what they were doing there. My mother-in-law rushed to hug him, but he stiffened, pulling back, his expression grim. He demanded to know why they'd come. Sarah tried to spin a tale about me controlling his life, separating him from them. Jacob cut her off. "It was my decision to cut contact. I don't want anything to do with either of you." His mother begged for forgiveness, but Jacob simply told them to leave our property, or he would call the police. They were visibly stunned, clearly not expecting this level of resolve from him. Jacob continued, his voice cold. "If you ever show up at our house again, we will contact the police and have you removed forcibly." They fled, utterly devastated, but Jacob no longer cared. I was so incredibly relieved that my husband had finally, unequivocally, spoken up for me. Jacob has since spoken with Phil, who was just as surprised and disgusted by their sneak attack. Phil assured us we were right not to let them in. With Jacob being so stern, I doubt they'll dare return. If they do, I'll call a lawyer instantly. I'm so relieved Jacob has finally seen how toxic his family truly is. I hope this is my final update. I'm ready to move on and live our lives peacefully. This is an unbelievable journey, one filled with heartache, frustration, and eventually, the incredible relief of finally standing firm against relentless toxicity. Jacob's transformation, from the golden child trying to keep the peace to a man fiercely defending his wife and home, was truly something to witness. It showed me that even the deepest family ties can be severed when they become a threat to your peace and well-being. This whole ordeal made me wonder, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw such a hard line with family, or put your foot down on an impossible demand? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts and experiences.